Hey everyone, Donut here. In this video, we're going to push Train Sim World to the absolute maximum graphics settings that it can do. I recently only got Train Sim World 5, and I thought, you know what, the graphics are going to be pretty good. Let's give it a whirl. And to be frank, I was a little bit disappointed. And so the good news is, behind the scenes, there is all these special settings. So to begin with, there's some obvious things you can do. I have a 4080, so there is no reason why it can't do Ultra. And so that's the first thing I did. I changed it to Ultra and things got a little better. So under Advanced, we just want everything to be Ultra, which it is. The settings that have High don't have an Ultra setting. So we have actually got it at the absolute max. The only slight difference from normal is I do lock it into 60 frames per second because I'm recording 60 frames a second and I'm more than happy to do that. And I also have a VSync turned on, which means you don't get a teared frame. But those are pretty minor. But otherwise, we have everything turned on, all the perfect settings, and away we go. So Engine.ini is in the WindowsNoEditor folder, and I'll put that link on the screen. And it looks like this by default. As you can see, there is no specialization for graphics. Train Sim World uses Unreal Engine, and Unreal Engine lets you modify this file and override what the game does. So I have an ultra beefed up version of that. So let's have a look at that. So as you can see, there's a lot more settings. What I've done is find every single setting available in Unreal Engine that you can modify at the engine level. So i.e. you can override what the game is doing. And a lot of these things are just pushing things to the limit. And particularly the main difference that I'm applying to the game to get it past Ultra up to Epic is the distance that we can see and the quality of shadows. And so a lot of these numbers up here, the scale ones, are telling us, hey, render 4 times further into the distance, or sometimes it's the other way around. Don't let go of the high resolution graphics until later. So, you know, fade it off a quarter the speed. And so some need to be negative, some need to be positive, some need to be like a fraction. And that's what all these top ones do. They just increase the range of the visualization. Then we get into how well the graphics are rendered, which is this whole area here. This thing is what, all this stuff is making like trees fade in nicely, make the leaves fade into the sky. The up top one, this one here, this one tells the game, do not read the graphics from the hard drive, get all of it and push it all into the RAM inside the GPU. I have 16 gig of RAM, and in most levels of the game, I'm still not seeing more than 6 or 7 gigabytes being used. So it easily fits inside RAM. And then down the bottom is a whole lot to do with shadows, and these are really important. This is what gives you shadows into the distance, and this is particularly what you'll see as a difference. And then down here is just bloom quality, how the sun is done, how it's represented, and then other kind of like the way that your eyes perceive the world. And then lastly at the bottom is 2 major things. Motion blur. Motion blur is an option in the menus. It is critical that you turn it on in Train Sim World. In other games which have Unreal Engine, sure, you may not need it, but what you need to do is get rid of the strobing effect of the sleepers, and this is critical in Train Sim World. And then fog. The game is designed to run lots and lots of scenarios which have fog in them, and so if the fog was missing, that's what that does. And these things on the bottom, these numbers, are just making the fog pixels much smaller. So rather than representing, you know, a couple of feet or a couple of yards by a couple of yards for each fog area, it's bringing it smaller and smaller and smaller. So let's get into the game, and we'll talk about these with the old game on the left and the new game on the right. All right, to the trains, rail journeys, we're going to do Great Western Express, Great World Journeys Express, Swansea to Paddington, and go. I chose this route predominantly for one reason. It has very straight lengths, and we can see a long way into the distance. And it means that things like shadows and stuff like that can easily be seen. So we'll quickly get this running. We'll turn the master switch on, get that going into forward, turn the brake off. We're going to stay in this front view, and then once the brake got to 0, which it just did, I'm going to put it on throttle 3, and then turn off the graphics. So on the left hand side you are seeing the game's default settings set at ultra, which is still like as good as it gets. Now obviously I could set it to high or low or medium, and obviously it would degrade significantly. And then this is the ultra plus all those customizations in the Unreal Engine's Engine.ini. And the differences aren't huge, but I will spot out one right now. Look at the shadow of that gantry on the right hand side. See how we've got the triangles? The gantries are showing a shadow that is much higher resolution. The game has been changed so that it will bother rendering a shadow if it takes up only 1 pixel. So normally it has to take up 64 pixels before it even shows. And then the resolution of the light going through objects and the size of the pixels is also quite rough normally, which means in the base game you get a very blurry type effect. And so that alone I think is one of the primary reasons why it looks different. Secondarily, the other thing you'll see is into the distance we actually see the rails. There's no clear delineation into the distance. You can see that the silver rail is fading off into the distance, and that is because of the skeletal bias. So what that means is the way graphics works is there's these 3D models, and at a certain point, rather than having this mesh of triangles and making a wireframe type thing, at a certain distance, instead of drawing objects that way, they just have a picture of the object. And a good example is trees. The trees in the far distance are just like a very simple paintbrush flat diagram. They're not this complex three-dimensional shape. They're a 2D shape in the far distance. And what happens is, this is called the LOD, the level of detail. When you're really close, the model is really complex and particularly is made of a mesh, a skeletal mesh. And then as you go further and further out, it's turning into lower resolution meshes. So think of a car that has maybe millions of triangles, and then when it's a kilometer away, it may only be represented by 10 or 20. And so it uses all these different resolutions into the distance, and then eventually you actually get to a 2D object, and it's a very simple thing because you don't really at a distance have the parallax to understand that it's a 3D object. Of note, the skeletal mesh applies to the rails. The rails need a 0.2 or 0.25, I think it is, ratio. So basically it turns into a 2D object or a simple object 4 times slower, which means it's 4 times further away. And that's what all the major numbers do. The general distance one increases the world length so that you're looking further and further away. So normally the game only renders maybe 1 or 2 kilometers or 1 or 2 miles, and it's got, I think it's set to a factor of 4, so it's rendering 5 to 10 miles away. So that's over the horizon, but it's out there. And there's examples later where we can look for like a chimney on the horizon, something that's very tall and will kind of like survive distance, and you can see it finally popping away. Also things like lights. You can see if you watch the front of this train coming towards us, you'll see its headlights nearly all the time. And so that's another factor, whether lights actually pop into existence at a certain distance. Is this perfect? No. If you look at the left hand side right now with the trees, there's a clear line where the high resolution plant life has a better shadow and a better model than trees in front of it. I will note though, if you watch under this bridge for a shadow, you can see that it's generating right now. It's because those shadow points are only taking a couple of pixels and it's rendered as soon as possible. So for some objects, particularly objects that are a mesh, they work really, really well. Unfortunately, I can't find a way of pushing out that left-hand side foliage mesh out further. I can get foliage to draw in a distance, but I can't get the high resolution one too. On the right-hand side, I think we saw one example before. This bridge is a good example. You can see how it's got this whiteness to it, and then it's going to have a shadow, and then it's going to have another shadow. So that's level of detail 0, level of detail 1, level of detail or normal, and then distant. And unfortunately, even though you can set, come on camera, it will fade back up again. Even though you can set that in the engine file to really push them out, it seems that the game overrides those settings, because what you're doing is you're setting the defaults, you're not overriding what the game is doing. So basically, you can, from what I can tell, is you can only set what is available or what is not set by the game, as in the residual. But in general, if we look at the foliage and everything else, I think it's very smooth. You don't see any really major pops. All the lights give a pretty good effect far into the distance. This bridge up here is the last thing I want to show. This bridge pops into existence. This is that white bridge is something that is clearly mapped to the render distance. And so in this Epic version, you can see that it's rendered in pretty clearly, pretty well from a long way away. Yeah, I love how this looks. I love how on these straight stretches you get a pretty clean rail view comparative to even what Ultra gives you. And as you can see, as we get closer and closer to this bridge, it's faded in beautifully. There's been no jarring effect of where the animation has happened. Yes, on the right hand side you can see very close to us that there's weird shadows next to the platform. You can see how the shadow is following the platform. Once again, that's very similar to the foliage distance. There is a high resolution shadow available at a close distance, and unfortunately I can't find a setting to push that out. I would like that to be maybe 2-3 times more further away. But as you can see, lastly here, you can see that the shadows under the bridge nicely fade in when they need to, and in general it's a lovely experience. Alright, that's 15 minutes of that. Let's go into a world where it is foggy and show what that is like as well. Alright, for this fog test, we're going to go into choose a route, and we're going to use the transpennine, and then we actually have a scenario, and it is called Down and Out. So we're actually going to retire a Class 101, which is a gorgeous old train, and it is in driving rain, and so it gives us a really good example of seeing how the fog applies, how the rain comes down, all those types of things. Down and out. So there we go. So we're on a station. We're just going to quickly run across the tracks. I know we shouldn't do that in real life. And our train's down the end here. You can see how the rain has beautifully been rendered. Things like the chimney there look fantastic. The glow around the lights looks fantastic. And this train right here is going to roll in as we set up this beautiful 101. You can see how the level of detail is fantastic. You can see all of the gauges and everything else look fantastic. And away we go. As you can see, the trees are doing a pretty good job of fading off into the distance. Completely different scale of graphics here. You know, shadows are not really a concern. It's more about the mist, the fog. Motion blur isn't probably really going to matter too much here. I do like how the lightning has been rendered across the world. Not that much of a bigger deal here when it comes to the comparison of the two. The fog resolution I do think helps a little bit, but in general, yeah, it looks fantastic. And you know, the downside is with all those settings, we are only running at 53 frames per second in this example. So you can push it a bit far. I'm looking at my GPU, and even though it's 53 frames a second, the GPU says it's only using 30% of its capacity. So I don't know whether it's a GPU issue or a CPU issue. CPU is only running at 30% as well. So I don't really know why it couldn't be better. And so obviously there is parts of the GPU that maybe are struggling to keep up with some of the calculations. The calculations have been really pushed to the max, where I'm asking it to do, you know, risky pixel by pixel mathematics rather than a group of pixels, and so exponentially I have made it significantly harder. So now when it comes to the hardware that you own and the frame rate that you get, you're just going to have to tweak with it. There's things that you're willing to compromise on, so you go into those areas and change the numbers. The text that you need to put in the Engine.ini. Obviously, I've put it in the description of this video. I was going to say email then. And so hopefully the description there is pretty good. I personally have found that if you do like a ChatGPT type of question and go, what does this setting do? It's pretty good explaining what it's for and what its effect will be. So give that a go if you're not sure what a setting is. That's actually what I did to generate the file. I said, ChatGPT, list me all the settings to do with X, Y, Z, and then I added them all, and I went through all the things like draw distance, foliage quality, shadow quality, lighting quality. I just asked lots and lots of questions. I had a reference to the Unreal documentation, Unreal Engine documentation as well. And yeah, the AI actually did a pretty good job at explaining what it should be. So we'll leave it there. As you can see, Transcend World can look quite different if you tweak the Engine.ini settings, and hopefully you will get a new level of enjoyment out of the game. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.